Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Room for Discussion.
In a world where digital threats are evolving much faster than our ability to counter them, cybersecurity is no longer just about protecting data. It's about safeguarding the very foundations of modern society. From hospitals, humanitarian organizations, to entire nations, no one is immune to the dangers lurking in cyberspace.
Our guest today, Stéphan Duguin, is at the forefront of the fight against cyber threats. As the CEO of the CyberPeace Institute, he leads a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to protecting the most vulnerable in cyberspace. Under his leadership, the Institute works to unveil cyber threats, advocate for accountability, and push for a safer digital space.
Today, we will dive into the realities of cybercrime, the geopolitical and human impacts of cyber warfare, and why cybersecurity should matter to all of us. We'll also explore the big questions about the future. How can we shift from reacting to attacks to proactively building cyber resilience? I'm Zosia.
And I'm Nena, and please join us in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Stéphan Duguin. Thank you. Please, Ben. Mr. Duguin, thank you for joining us here today. It's a pleasure to have you. Right off the bat, how concerned should the average citizen be about cybersecurity?
Okay. Not a good guest in wedding planning usually because I'm always breaking the bad news, so I will try, to still sound optimistic here. But yes, quite concerned. Now, if you want to slice the problematic, you need to look into the thing that can do by anyone to protect themselves and lower the concern level, and the thing that are really like systemic threats to the ecosystem that we all share, which is cyberspace. So if your concern goes into how secure is the whole internet and how it can be pregnant to cyber attacks, it's huge. Because we have an issue of securing the system. We have an issue of the increased capacity of the one who wants to deploy attack versus a decreased capacity of the one who are defending ourselves or in need of defense. So from there, there's concerns. But happy to go into more deeper question on this.
As the CEO of the CyberPeace Institute, we are curious to hear what inspired the creation of this institute and what are the main problems that you're trying to tackle.
In fact, I will quote your first question, the concern. I mean, there's concern, there's something to be done. The problem with cybersecurity is that it's lived from a very old misunderstanding, as if it's something for the expert, it's something that is super technical, that no one really understands, when this is absolutely untrue. Cybersecurity is into everything that is of value to us, in access to water, access to food, in healthcare, in financial transaction, in running this university, into whatever, deploying education. If you do not have working system in cybersecurity, nothing works. And as soon as you touch upon something that is so global and so critical, as everything else, you have scarcity and abundance. And we look into the scarcity. Some problem, they don't have the means, they don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity to be secure, to defend themselves, to organize their data properly. And interestingly enough, these are the ones that are mostly under cyber attacks. We decided when setting up the CyberPeace Institute to focus on the most vulnerable. And within that community, which is quite big, we decided to focus on civil society, NGOs, the ones who are ensuring access to food, access to water, helping refugees, curbing gender-based violence, curbing climate change. These entities today are doing something essential to all of us, essential, especially in this crisis that we know, and they are heavily under cyber attacks. So these are the ones that we want to help.
But so in this focus on the most vulnerable in society, when we're talking about something like cybersecurity, is anyone not vulnerable?
Yes, indeed, but you have to look into the potential impact of an attack against someone. You, me, everyone, we are vulnerable in cyberspace when we use our email, secure connection to the bank and the like, and whatever, in our daily life. Okay, fine. There's some good practices that we can put in place that honestly, if we all put in place, we would avoid 90% of the cyber attacks. We can talk about this if you want. It's always the boring, change your password, put multi-factor authentication. I'm sorry, I don't have anything new to say than what is said for decades, but if you do that, it works, simply put. But your question, I think we're going somewhere else. We need to prioritize the support to the one, should they be impacted, then there's going to be a scale effect. So when organizations like Terre des Hommes, like Doctors Without Borders, Reporters Without Borders, WaterAid International are under cyber attack, and if an attack succeeds, this is thousands of beneficiaries that are already in underserved community that are impacted. That's where we want to focus our action. Interestingly, civil society, especially the NGOs that I'm mentioning, are the only sector on the planet which is targeted by cyber criminals, targeted by states, and targeted by activists. Everyone wants something out of them. Cyber criminals, why? Because when there's a crisis, there's a earthquake somewhere, or there's a COVID-19 or the whatnot, money is moving to civil society to be in the front line, to help refugees, to facilitate access to healthcare, to provide humanitarian aid. And because money is there for cyber criminals, like a blinking spot on the map. So a vector of attack to someone that is not so secure. The same civil society, when, for example, the whole ecosystem of NGOs, which was active in Ukraine before the invasion in 2022, is suddenly under attack by a state actor because they are servicing a specific country in a geopolitical shifting context. And the same civil society can be attacked, again, the example of Ukraine, by whoever takes sides for estates. And we saw that after the invasion of Ukraine, where a lot of activist group or volunteer group were starting to perform cyber attacks against interest in Ukraine, including civil society.
It seems like the CyberPeace Institute brings the unique value of focusing on civil society and especially NGOs. However, I want to ask you, how does your role differ from governments and private companies who have admittedly much deeper pockets in this regard?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, it's difficult to talk about all governments and all private sector, but let's try to slice it down in the cybersecurity landscape. So, private sector, cybersecurity, let's separate them in two big families, maybe three, but two to start with. The central one is the one that is providing cybersecurity services. They're selling cybersecurity services. There's no market with the NGOs. The NGOs are broke. Civil society is broke, and with the cut of billions from the Dutch government last year, and the US disappearing 65 billion of support in aid for civil society, this is not getting better. So you don't have a market at scale where cybersecurity vendors, they can deploy tools to help this community. And even so, I would even do the devil's advocate, if that would be the case, there's no capacity within the civil society to integrate the tool and to take the time to be secure. It takes time to be secure. You need, to recruit someone that understands the problematic and the tool to use, to follow through, to be always there. And there's today much more job opening in cybersecurity than people on the planet in capacity to fill in their job. So you can imagine with the scarcity of talent, civil society is not going to be the first door where these people would go. So that's the problem with the private sector. Government, their focus is on themselves, is on critical infrastructure, but you do not have government-based program at scale which is servicing civil society. Sometimes it's even the other way around. You have government which are targeting civil society with cyber attacks, and that's not going into the right direction. So we identify this gap that you have this whole ecosystem of non-profit, which are working in all the verticals that all of us need in order to live, and no one is doing anything about this. So the thing is that recognizing the problem and putting something in front of it which scale. So today we support close to 500 NGOs. We deploy more than 1,300 volunteers to help them, and I can explain the role of the private sector there, because we source this volunteer with the private sector. And it sums up to more than 2,000 free hours of work done with the civil society, tracking of more than 400,000 cyber attacks against them, and the like. So it's not only about identifying that there's a need, it's also what kind of scaling system we can put in front of that need. And nothing was done at scale by the private sector or by government.
But I'm curious to hear about then how the Institute interacts with these different actors as well, specifically thinking about governments. Do you find yourself getting a lot of help from them? Do you find that sometimes they're not as supportive of the work that you do?
It's okay, to interface with these different communities, the government or the private sector, it's about also taking a clear position. Our position is that we do not take side. That's the first one.
Take sides.
Take side in the sense that we do not say that this. Let's take the example of the invasion of Ukraine. So we put in place a public platform to track and trace cyber attacks and disinformation after the invasion. Everyone was telling us you need to do this only from what Russia is doing. But we did this from the point of view of the victim. When there was a victim, we're looking into who was attacking that victim. And there were threat actors in Russia, there were threat actors in Ukraine, and there were threat actors globally. And interestingly, by this approach of not taking sides, if not the side of the victim, we could track and trace that after the invasion of Ukraine, in fact, nor Russia nor Ukraine were the most affected states by cyber attacks, but all the other states of the world are. So it's already like a global war in cyberspace after the invasion. And you can really report on this if you, okay, maybe the statement was wrong, if you side with the victims, if you side with whoever is the target. Mm-hmm. So having that position helps us a lot to discuss with states. Sometimes it's interesting discussion with the ones that do not want to discuss with us, and Russia is a good example, and to discuss with the private sector. Because now we act as a platform for the private sector to deploy funds and volunteers that we can channel where the need is. We discuss with states in order to join existing program of support in a way that they are going to service NGOs. So we have been recognized now as a platform where capacity building for civil society can scale, where the data that we independently collect from what is happening in cyberspace can be presented by states during processes when they discuss regulation and norms in the cyberspace, being at the United Nations level or EU level. So that's how the interface is. You keep a stance, you protect at all costs your independence, and then you demonstrate by the work that you can be an actor of trust for states who wants to work with you or not, and for private sector who wants to work with you or not. At the end of the day, it's a free world.
We're going to discuss the case of Ukraine and the role of the private sector in a moment. But first, we would like to take a closer look at how the cybersecurity landscape has evolved over the past years. But before we begin, we might need to define some concepts, as people use terms like cybercrime, cyberattacks, and cyber warfare quite interchangeably. So could you describe what are the key differences and why does this distinction matter in policymaking?
It's a very good question. The need to define, the need to put some ontology and semantics, which I guess in a place like this is quite important. And then how this survived the hit with reality. Let me start with the reality and we go back to the definitions. With an example. So I don't know if any of you knows about the doppelganger group. So it's a threat actor, which is backed by the Federation of Russia. And what they do for a living is creating a fake information environment, so fake websites, that you normally go to. And from this fake website, they organize global disinformation campaign and foreign interference. Doppelganger as a group is in need to have their own technical infrastructure to operate. So for that, they need to rent servers. They need to use their credit card, to buy a server somewhere, to host their malware, and to do something about it. They need to buy fake companies or create fake companies left and right in the world to protect themselves from investigation. And they need to move data and money around, from their proceed or even for their HR system to hire people to help them in, really basic stuff. When you analyze that, you realize that this infrastructure, this workforce, this system is used by them not only for disinformation, but also for cyber attacks. And within cyber attacks at large, specifically cybercrime. I will go to your definition. So it shows that in the thinking of the threat actors, these definitions do not matter. Because whatever they have, they are going to send it at you, at scale, always. If it's about disinforming the community around you to demonstrate that there's no trust to you, they will do it. If it's about sending a phishing email, you're going to click on it, you're going to have a malware, they will do it. If it's about putting a ransomware in your machine and holding all the system to account, they will do it. They will do whatever it costs to hurt you. So it's important to define. I'm not saying it's not. But if having the definition driving too much your operational response to the threat actors in silos, then you start creating problems. And in fact, that's the situation we are in. The defense is living on definitions that are old school, with the body of knowledge that's been created in silos, from the body of knowledge agencies, specific services, meaning people, meaning budget, meaning bosses, and all these people want to keep the silos because it's kind of the survival. Where on the other end of the attack, everything goes. So, cyber attack. A cyber attack is any use of a technical infrastructure that you do to create harm. Whatever modus operandi that you use is this. Interestingly, cyber attacks always focus on the lower part of the internet. If you take the internet and you slice it up, and you go from the cables, the pipes, where the electricity goes, up to the content that is floating in social media, let's say, cyber attacks is towards the downstream. So it's, I'm going to send you a piece of code to enter in your computer, and within your computer, I'm going to deploy myself in your network. And when I'm there for months, when I'm positioning myself in all your infrastructure, I will lock it up, I will encrypt everything, and I will ask you for money. Cyber attack. The content part of the internet has been considered different, especially in Europe and especially in the Western countries, where to say everything that is happening using content to do harm, like disinformation, manipulation, is not a cyber attack. It's a disinformation, it's a campaign. Interestingly, threat actors do not think like this. They consider that the whole stack is cyber attack. So, definition for who, be used how. Cybercrime is when a cyber attack is used with a financial motive, usually. Or if it's not a financial motive, with the criminal motive. Examples, ransomware, I was mentioning, I put you to ransom, or the specific grooming of children or deployment of child sexual abuse material, which is what the criminal intent. And so anything that is punishable by law and conducted by an actor that could be or not be identified. That's the cybercrime. Cyber warfare is everything that is done with cyber in the context of a conflict to support your geopolitical agenda. As we saw, I was taking this example, I will take it again, what was done by Russia months before the invasion, hours before the invasion, at the moment of the invasion, and afterwards. Clearly used of cyber in the context of warfare.
Does the threat actor, in this case, definitionally, does that matter?
It does, because depending on the threat actors, the accountability level that you expect and then the capacity, the legal capacity to go after them is very different. The expectation on these actors is different. If an actor is the state, and the state is attacking, they are supposed to adhere to international law, to different frameworks that they sign up to, and their level of accountability is very different. If it's a criminal group, it's already very, very different in terms of accountability level and mechanism of pursuit. If it's loose network of activists wandering in the morning, am I going to do Netflix? Am I going to attack someone? I don't know, so maybe I have my time to lose. That's, again, different. Interestingly, you were asking about the evolution of the threat landscape. Now, it's very loose in between these threat actors, these criminals, and these activists. One working for the other one hosting the other one against any possibility for extradition when there's judicial activities against criminal. Very loose groups of volunteers which really decide almost on a daily basis to decide to side with that country or side with that group. You even have people that are working for criminal groups and they don't even know. Because it's kind of this slicing of activities on the internet where everything becomes a micro job and you're working for someone who's working for someone. You have no clue who is the someone in the end and you end up working for a criminal group and you had no idea because you don't ask.
As you mentioned, there's so much going on in the internet. And as you mentioned in one of the previous interviews, the major problem in the cybersecurity industry right now is burnout. There are simply too many cases, too many data and just not enough time. So when faced with this constant overload, what do you prioritize when responding to cyber threats?
Again, the type of victim, the victimology is important. The one, should they be impacted, this is going to lead of the most harm, clearly. So that's how we focus our support. From the modus operandi side, also the type of threats which are so problematic to the security of whole that they should be countered or curbed. Here I'm talking about the ongoing experiment of autonomous cyber attacks. I mean, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but if you want to make a cyber attack, there's always the same step that you need to follow. So, and that's why this market is very effective, because this step can be subcontracted. Today, you don't have a criminal group or state actor that is doing everything. So they want to do harm, they want to make this attack, they will contact you to develop the malware, they will contact you to encrypt it, they will contact me to run the server about the malware, and they will contact someone else to launder the money when the money is exfiltrated. So all of us, we work on a cyber attack, we don't know each other, we don't live in the same country, but at the end of the day, our aggregated skill sets is going to create harm with a victim. So anything that is scaling this is today something that we need to curb. And we see today this standard process of cyber attack, entities which are experimenting with, I'm going to use AI to automate this, and AI to automate that, and AI to automate this, creating the risk of fully autonomy across the whole kill chain. And that's the concern that we're having.
But then do you see automation and AI as a practical solution to this overload, or only creating new risks that institutes such as yours need to manage?
Yeah, I mean, it's also to see how AI works and what we mean by AI. There's this, if you discuss with the cybersecurity community, so also the one selling cybersecurity products, what you're going to hear is that today AI is on the side of the defenders, which honestly, it's not per se such a stretch. Why? Because to deploy AI tool sets in a volatile environment, you need to have the data that you can train your AI on. If you're the one protecting your own infrastructure, you have your data about your ecosystem, so you have an advantage to the attackers that has no view to what is inside your system. The second bit, you need to have very big processing power, meaning money to pay for it. And the third bit is you need to have the talent to run your models. And today, most of the AI talent, they still go in the private sector and not so much in criminal groups. So you have kind of an advantage. But who are we talking about here? The civil society, which already today cannot pay, to get their staff doing the job that they need. Are they going to have the capacity to leverage this AI as a defense? I don't think so.
So coming back to what you were talking about earlier with this problem of burnout and a real strain with resources, you mentioned that we see governments relying on the private sector to ensure cybersecurity as well. What does this reliance or this, like you said, pushing the different parts of the puzzle away to different actors, how does that shape the sort of international response to cyber threats?
The relationship between government and the private sector, you mean?
Yeah.
First, it's important to understand that the security of the internet infrastructure, which is used by government, is in the vast majority managed by the private sector. And for not so much from market reason to start with, but for very practical reason. The internet, the way it's built, the way it's been thought through, is led, owned, managed, operated mostly by the private sector. So we are kind of renting it. As soon as we start connecting on this thing, we are renting a space, we are using a space for some time that is owned by someone else. And we just forgot the way it works, and we just got used to it. So that's you, me, government is the same. Except in some part of the world where government is trying also to enforce their own infrastructure for people to use. But that's still marginal. So having that in mind, there's an obligation for government to work with the private sector when it comes to ensuring their cybersecurity. But there's a community that is forgotten there, that government relies a lot on, sometimes knowingly or unknowingly, is civil society actors. So I'm talking non-profit, sometimes not even a registered non-profit, it's a loose network of volunteers, which are ensuring the cybersecurity of everyone, and we don't even know about it. Because the way internet has been built has never been for security. It's been for exchange, it's been for, I mean, that's the history of that network. So security came afterwards. And you have all these people that you don't know, they are spending their time every day, they're not paid for that, in order to be sure that what we have works, stands, is solid. It's not the private sector, it's not government. And again, these people are, the day they stop, we start having a big problem. And they are not financed, they are not paid for. We are talking about hundreds of organizations that are referenced doing this. So the headache of government now, and discussing with a lot of them, that I can report on that, is how to engage with these different communities to ensure that what is most critical, like nuclear plants, like energy plants, like electricity grid, like healthcare, is not going to fall down if there's an at-scale cyber attack. And when you want to look at this, you need to say, okay, this is my infrastructure, like my healthcare infrastructure. With who do I need to talk to be sure it's going to be secure for this kind of attack or this kind of intrusion, etc. And it's a piecemeal that is quite complicated to engage with.
So maybe right now let's move to the case of Ukraine to showcase how those things play out in real life. As you mentioned, the CyberPeace Institute has been the only platform that has publicly traced those cyber attacks in Ukraine. Can you describe to us why is such an open detection important?
Because it provides data, independent data, with the clear methodology, and I guess in a temple of education like this one, it's important to understand it's obvious to understand the importance of methodology and data for any positioning, policy making, or statements. It was important for state to have this data for their negotiation in different multilateral fora. I mean, saying that after the invasion there's cyber attacks without data, it's meaningless. We need to demonstrate it. We had submission to the International Criminal Court to demonstrate, or not, but at least with data, if these cyber attacks were so connected with the kinetic activities that they were moving up the threshold of war crimes or aggression. But you need this data. So that's why we put this work in context. You were asking about the threat actors before. We started with the attacks. We quickly identified that it was unique in the history of cyber attacks that there were so many threat actors active at the same time. It's more than 120 distinct threat actors which are firing on internet every day since this invasion. And this dataset has been used regularly by academics, by states, also by the private sector for strategic decision-making in capacity building, choosing of a specific approach, technical approach for defense, and we hope to be used for litigation and making sure that the victims that we are sadly discovering and bringing up what is happening to them will have a better access to redress and justice.
So apart from just the multitude of different threat actors that can and do exist within the context of cyber warfare, how else does cyber warfare compare to regular kinetic warfare in terms of the harm that it causes?
Yeah, need to be nuanced in between compare and augment. So the way, for example, the Federation of Russia thought about cyber attacks prior to invasion, at the moment of invasion, was to augment the capability of the kinetic attack. Let's be very practical. If you want to destroy a power grid, it's easier to throw a bomb at it or a missile than to craft a cyber attack. It's going to be cheaper, you're going to have a bigger effect, and that's something that you have a long-lasting military doctrine to do. Cyber attacks is more complicated to do. So if you have to compare. Now, the malware that was sent against Ukraine months before the invasion, the fake ransomware attack that were designed only to enter into system and get information, the hours before the invasion, positioning into Ukrainian network to take down the communication. And after the invasion, at the moment of the invasion, synchronized the direct targeting of Viasat, for example, as a satellite-based communication network used by Ukraine, is clearly augmentation of your kinetic effort. That's how cyber needs to be understood in the context of warfare.
And you've spoken about another interesting aspect of the situation in Ukraine. I don't think it's necessarily unique to it, but this idea of the civilianization, right, of cyber attacks, where we see civilians really directly engaging in digital warfare. And so here we see Russian groups and actors threatening or attacking anyone that seems to be even opposed to Russian interests. And you've said that this blurs the line between who we see as a civilian, who's in the military, and ultimately who is being attacked, and so, or who the target is. But what does that mean at the end of the day for our somewhat conventional understanding of the role of civilians in warfare?
It's very concerning when it comes to escalation from different point of view. So let's go back to definition and let's go back to legal framework. So when there's a aggression, invasion, following with an open conflict, there's a specific status which is given to civilian and a specific status which is given to combatant. If, from the Netherlands, you wake up in the morning, you say, you know what, I'm going to make a denial of service attacks against this entity in Russia. That's nice, can be kind of fun. I don't think it is, but okay, why not? But by doing this, you bear the risk of being a combatant in a conflict. You drag your country and infrastructure with you under international law. And this whole civilization of the thing has totally missed that, because it's so fast, it's so practical. Tools have been deployed so that the community can use in order to crowdsource cyber attacks against Ukrainian target or Russian targets. Anyone using these tools and participating to it becomes a combatant to the conflict. And then it's a different ballgame if you're as your status of civilian. That's the first. The second is, let's say that tomorrow there's a ceasefire. That's it. There's something that is happening and the bomb stops, the troops withdraw. Who is going to make sure that all these civilians are going to stop cyber attacks? And is this going to be seen as respecting the ceasefire? And if so, how can you prove that they're taking orders by the military or not? And that's the issue that that's the world we live in now. And that's the blurred lines. And the potential for escalation is quite huge.
So when talking about the potential of escalation, you already mentioned the Viasat attack, which demonstrates the immense spillover effects that cyber attacks can have. Could you describe to us what are those spillover effects and what do they reveal about the vulnerabilities of the global system as a whole?
Yeah, there's a second misunderstanding of the cyberspace, I guess. So the first one is that cyber is technical and in fact it's an everyday things. And because of that one, second misunderstanding is that there's no way anyone can control the scope of the cyber attack. There's no way. Everything is connected. So you could be the most crafted attackers that you think you are. At the end of the day, the network is going to give the full scope of what you were trying to do. Viasat is a good example. So there was a wiper attack targeting the telecommunication services and control and command services of Ukraine at the moment of the invasion. And in fact, the way it was crafted impacting wind turbine at the other end of Europe, because things are just interconnected. We saw that years ago with the WannaCry attack. So with the ransomware that was deployed, it was just replicating itself so fast that it was infecting the hundreds of thousands of computers every day, way beyond the original scope of the attacker. So it's kind of in the DNA of a cyber attack, because it's deployed on a connected system. So you're suddenly very dependent on how well or how badly the system is connected to the reach of the attack. Again, problem of escalation in this context.
On this note, I think it's a good moment to turn to the audience for the first time. So if you do have a question, please raise your hands and we will come to you with a microphone. Yeah, over here at the front.
Hi, thank you for coming. I was wondering, because we are talking about Russian actors and Chinese actors that are mostly responsible for cyber attacks, also in Europe and the United States. I was wondering, especially now with a new administration that is really about action and retaliation, are you afraid that the United States will respond to this and actually carry out retaliatory attacks in the future?
You have to check what changed really, what is said is going to change, and look into the US doctrine for the past years, to put that in history. So there's the US is one of the few countries which put in place some very strong litigation system against the cyber attackers. This is not going to change. It was more concerning to see more nuanced statements of the US diplomacy when it comes to Russia, for example. So this is a problem for the victims of cybercrime. So a lot of vast majority of cyber criminal gangs and groups are based in Russia or benefiting from the haven organized by the Federation of Russia. If the rest of the states, including the United States, is not clear-cut about this, calling it out every time that is happening, and start doing into the nuance of maybe it's not sure, etc., there's a big issue, clearly. And that's something that is developing. We still have to see where it goes, but there were quite some concerning signs. The second bit is, you mentioned in the US, you can take this for a lot of countries, is how these countries are going to adhere to the rules that they themselves signed for. And you have this list of norms that has been edicted by the United Nations, ratified by the states. They are voluntary norms, but still they are there. We don't see so much of an accountability for the states which are not enforcing this norm, or putting even capacity in-house, their own government, to have the technology to uphold them. And that's something that we see, including with the states.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the audience? We have another one up here at the front.
So I was wondering, we've been talking about attacks coming from Russia and China, and I was wondering how you were thinking about countering those attacks with cyber attacks of our own, and whether we should have a higher standard for ourselves from Europe when participating in these counter cyber attacks.
So you mentioned definition before. I guess it's important for both your questions to define what we mean by counterattacks, so that we're on the same page. Maybe we don't speak about the same thing. So if both your question is about a state or any actor having a cyber attack capability, like what normally a criminal is doing, in order to go against a target, my position on this, CyberPeace position on this, is that it's the worst idea ever. For what I was mentioning before, no one on this planet can today control the breadth of the effect of the attacks that you're going to conduct. So maybe you think it's a good idea to attack this target. In the end, you don't know how it's going to end. A lot of these attacks have spillover effect on civilian and on non-military target in the context of the conflict. So it's by design a bad idea. Now, if you mean counterattack, going after the assets that are used by the cyber criminal, yes. So let me explain the difference. So criminals today, or states, to perform cyber attacks, they need technical infrastructure. That's it's a given. You cannot do anything about this. So if it's about identifying all the pieces of the technical infrastructure, the servers, the IP address that are used for sourcing the attacks, whatever technology is put in place, and hitting that technology from a judicial standpoint by seizing the servers, like redirecting the traffic from these servers to a place where you're going to prevent any harm, yes. But that's different. And I know that both modus operandi are sometimes described as counterattack, but they are very different, also legally in nature.
Okay. Thank you so much for the audience questions. Right now, we would like to go back to the interview. You just mentioned, the problem of legal definitions. And in one of the previous interviews, you said that there's a misconception that the cyberspace isn't regulated, which is simply not true. that there are many laws in place, but they're simply not properly enforced, which kind of begs the question, why is it the case? Is it due to lack of political will, lack of resources, or something completely else?
Okay, that's the case, first. That's the short answer. And it's getting worse, to be honest. Why? Part of it, I would say, is the technical capability. Part of it is the availability of workforce within states in any of these organism agencies that should be responsible for enforcing regulation. Because cyber is such a complex topic, with so many interfaces between the policy level, the technical level, the forensic level, the law enforcement one, it's difficult for any states today to have the right capacity to say, okay, this is the piece of law, we're going to implement it like this, we're going to measure always, etc. Just don't have the workforce, the resources are not there, it's scarce. It's not an excuse, I don't think it is, but that's an explanation. The second bit is, even if states would invest heavily into this workforce and this capacity, I don't even think it's possible. Because there's such a mushrooming of legal framework around digital, cyber, internet, now AI, and some laws are just conflicting with the others. So the need for deconfliction in between legal framework to do something of value is immense. In between just look at the EU. And I'm going to play acronyms now, sorry. But the past 3 years is DMA, CRA, and DSA, NIS, NIS2, AI Act, before that GDPR, and that's just top of my mind. There's more. All of this has an impact on cybersecurity, all of it. Who today can navigate all of this in details, understanding the impact, and inform a state for action? It's just crazy. So, and I was discussing with the Commission just last week. It's not about saying that regulation is a bad idea, not at all. I mean, we are absolutely for that. This needs to be regulated. But if you just regulate for the sake of regulating and you don't invest as many resources as the regulation one, if not more, for the implementation, then it doesn't make any sense. And that's today the situation with cyberspace, which is why there's this legend that it's not regulated, it's the Far West, blah, blah, blah. Not at all. There's so many regulations, which is why cyberspace. There's way, yeah, there's enough.
And
just sorry to finish on this question. This legend opened the front for problems. So you may have seen, if not, you're going to, I'm pretty sure like this, that a cybercrime treaty has just been endorsed by United Nations and is going to be now put into motion in all the national states. You know which states put this on the table? Russia. So interestingly, we have a treaty which was pushed by Russia on the table about cybercrime. It's kind of interesting. Where there was a consistent opposition from all civil society for 3 years of negotiation. And still, this has been, put in place and enforced. And part of it is also this kind of, it's at minima disinformation, at maxima, crafting of deliberate fakes, that the existing framework of international cooperation when it comes to cybercrime was not performing, existing, good enough, which is not true. But now we have a framework that is put in place and that is taking as the approach the one of a state like Russia when it comes to human rights, when it comes to freedom of speech, when it comes to defend researchers. So you imagine where we are. And that's, to me, concerning.
Continuing on this topic, the Human Rights Watch encouraged EU member states to vote against the UN Cybercrime Convention, saying that, it enables states to use many abusive powers. Would you say that the convention allows states to use the convention as a tool for surveillance?
It is, because the way it's been framed was with the lowest common denominator when it comes to human rights, when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to check and balances, because it's a wide negotiation in the UN, and this is very concerning. It's not like we haven't seen what these kind of states are doing when it comes to cyber for the past years. So we know where we're coming from. So yeah, wait and see how it's going to be implemented. But we are we, civil society, there was not only us, it's hundreds of organizations who said that, are quite concerned.
And looking specifically at Europe, because again, there was a lot of concern with how this convention would align or not align with EU law that already exists, specifically regarding human rights and surveillance. The most famous recent case, the Paragon one, has been used as the perfect example of Europe's spyware crisis. Amnesty wrote a report about it just a couple months ago. Could you walk us through this case just a little and explain why it was so significant?
Yeah, this case, which is quite recent, so with a heavy center in Italy, is an excellent use case for the proliferation and abuse of spyware globally. So you may know or not that a lot of states do not have the internal capability to develop their own sets of intrusion possibilities, meaning they don't have the capacity to develop and maintain spyware, which have the possibility to go in your phone and your machine. You don't have to click on anything, you will never know, but they are inside. So developing this capacity costs money, resources, talent, and states for quite some time now just accepted to subcontract it to the private sector. Okay. And you may have heard about other cases with other companies like NSO, with the Pegasus malware, so Paragon is very similar. So you have private sector companies which are telling you, we are the one to enforce the ethics, we are the one to make sure that this is going to use in a human rights enforcing way, and we are not going to sell this to states which are not going to do something nice and legal about it. Okay. Can you access proof of this statement now? Is there any oversight, like an independent oversight on these statements? No, but that's the way it is. So Italy, like a lot of other states, procured these kind of tools in order to, it's all under the seal of national security, the need for intelligence services, counterterrorism, and the like, which, with my background, I was working for law enforcement for more than 25 years, I will not discuss nor discard. There's for sure a need there. But law enforcement is about enforcing the law. And normally it's with oversight and with independent look into what you do and if it's proportional with what you want to achieve. Here, the proportionality level is absolutely flabbergasting, to say the least. Is we have companies that have the capacity to enter into any phone on the planet. In order to do that, they need to make sure that vulnerabilities on these phones or computers are always existing, so they need to maintain our cyber insecurity always, because that's what they sell. They sell the fact that as long as this hole exists in your phone, they can sell their product. And I'll go back on that specific point and remind me if I forgot when it comes to the EU regulation landscape, because there's an interesting point here. So, and these companies live from this, and then states are buying that in order to normally do that lawfully. And it's not the case, we see that. Journalists are targeted, human rights defenders are targeted, activists are targeted. Interestingly, the conversation around spyware spiked in Europe when heads of states were targeted, where members of the parliament were targeted, and suddenly it was, what's happening here? So EU states are buying spyware from Israel in order to deploy them against other EU states. It starts not looking good. So, interestingly, last week I was in Paris in what is called the Pall-Mall process. You can look it up, which is a multi-stakeholder process, which has been launched by France and United Kingdom in order to put some measures of responsibility around these commercial tools for intrusion. And a code of conduct has just been signed last week by 23 states in order to, it's voluntary, it's not binding, but at least you have a code of conduct saying, okay, I, states, admit to the fact that I need to be careful about A, B, C, D, and F in order to make sure that when I use these tools, it is under oversight, it doesn't go against export control, and it's lawful. Not binding framework at all. But that's where we are. That's the best that we could get. Go back to the point about the vulnerability. So you have in the EU regulation about cybersecurity. And the regulation about cybersecurity is that all the system needs to be secured, it needs to be up to date, there should not be any vulnerability. When at the same time the EU is buying tools which can only work if the whole system is not secure. And that's the same EU.
But so in these cases like Paragon, where you have civilians being targeted by military-grade spyware, who do we hold accountable?
We need to look at the whole chain from the company who developed the tool, the private equities or venture capitalists who decided to put money into this company, the state who bought the company, to bought the tool, sorry, then the people who deployed the tool against the targets which should never have been targeted. So it's a long chain of accountability. I would like just to give you an idea of what this means. I hope that none of you ever will be targeted by these kind of technologies, but sadly I could discuss with people who were, and it's so heavy as harm that these people will never be whole again. Because what happens is that when you receive this notification out of the blue, so the way it happens is that you're doing whatever, you receive a notification on your telephone saying, hello, this is Apple or this is Meta, and we think you've been under surveillance. And you're like, you don't know when, you don't know by who, you don't know since when, and that's what is happening. This is the starting point of you losing potentially your job, losing your social life, because you become like someone that is holding a virus that is so bad that no one wants to communicate with you anymore. No one wants to be part in your network, because if you can be impacted, I can be impacted. Oh, you send messages to me. Am I also a target? You cannot trust the fact that for months before, years before, someone somewhere had access to everything in your phone, everything in your life, every conversation, every pictures, everything. And this is causing so much trauma and so much psychological damage that is one of these cyber attacks, because to the definition, that's a cyber attack, that's a cyber crime, when it's done by a non-state actor, is having permanent human harm. And there's not so many crimes out there that have permanent human harm like this. So that's what we are facing. And clearly, it's nice to have a code of conduct, it's the right direction. The Palmal process is quite ambitious for that, and we can say we're successful to lead this, but the ambition is way further. Now we have to enforce this accountability to protect these victims.
Now I'm curious to hear about accountability on a state level. The Tele Manual, which was published by the Cambridge University Press, discusses how international law applies to cyber warfare, and it argues that states should be held responsible for attacks launched from their territory. Do you think that we should start sanctioning cyber safe havens, even if it sparks geopolitical backlash?
No.
Or is it even possible to do so?
No, if there's a toolbox for sanction, it should be used. I mean, as soon as you consider that activity and an intent is unlawful when it comes to international law or the body of laws, then if you have a toolbox, use it. Indeed. The issue with cyber is the attribution part. That's what is very complicated, is that technically speaking, to attribute a cyber attack is not, it's not a simple ballgame. And the capacity for the actors to say, was not me, not me, no, this server, this is not me, this is someone else. Or even you see now threat actors pretending to be someone else. So they use the same modus operandi or infrastructure of other states in order to make the victim believe they've been attacked by that one and not that one. Again, the problem of escalation. But if the attribution is done properly, then yes, it's, the toolbox should be used. And if attribution cannot be done, there's other means that can happen. In any strategy of cyber deterrence, if you want to deter the adversary to impact you, you have two branches. One is resilience. You need to create walls so thick and capacity so big that it becomes very complicated for the attackers to attack you because it just costs too much. And then you need to create a very strong accountability framework, is that even if they succeed, the risk for them to have retaliation is very high. So attribution is just part of this. There's a lot of activities you can do in order to elevate these two branches.
But then, if cyber attacks can cripple power grids, shut down hospitals, and disrupt entire economies. Why don't we treat them as acts of war?
Take the example of Costa Rica. So Costa Rica was targeted quite recently with one of the biggest wave of ransomware ever. And this was claimed by a criminal group. So the criminal group which is attacking government entities, public sector, in a scale which led Costa Rica to say, we are now in a state of emergency, and I consider that this is an act of terrorism. And that's the issue in terms of blurring line, is you have a modus operandi which is criminal in nature, but can scale to a level of a state, bringing a state down, but you cannot consider that a criminal group is waging war on a state. Even it's what Costa Rica says, if you look into the international framework. And that's the difficulty. Is if we try only to have a legal answer to it, to look into the existing normative framework and to say, because this happened like this with that actor, then it means that, I don't think we'll go too far, because the modus operandi is evolving too fast. It would be way better to invest into the resilience, into the security of system, into the leveraging, as you were saying, the sanctions that are already existing against individuals when we see that these individuals are involved in cyber attacks, to make sure that when there's an attack, there's a cost. Today, that's the issue. It's not so much that we don't have a legal framework, there's the legal framework. The problem is that you can sit in your couch, make a cyber attack, kind of knowing nothing is going to happen to you. And that's the issue.
So as we start wrapping up this hour, I think we've really gotten the sense that also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the issue with even trying to address cyber threats, cyber attacks, is that it's a very reactive process. We patch vulnerabilities once they're exploited. Is there any way to get ahead of the curve on this? Or are we stuck in this endless cycle of defense?
No, and you're mentioning regulation. Let's take the Cyber Resilience Act that the EU is working on now. It's about putting cybersecurity by design before putting a tool on the market. That's also interesting. So instead of having this run for innovation, I won't be to the first one on the market, and I don't care if my code is half-baked and if my app is half working out, and I'm doing this huge cybersecurity problem, then there's going to be accountability to these vendors and developers that if they do that, they would have to pay. They will be fine. So with this, you solve part of the problem, which is this increasing vulnerability. You're more proactive. Doing that, and that's the difficulty with cyber, you need to respect the different roles in the ecosystem. If it's a company developing software for a living and they sell it, of course they should be in responsibility to make sure it's secure. But if it's a civil society collective, like a volunteer that are maintaining an open source framework that just needs to be secure for everyone else to work, and doing that, they could make a mistake of cybersecurity, are you going to find them? When just waking up in the morning and going in bed at night just to secure everything that we have. So it's about being very nuanced in the regulation, but these nuances requires policymakers who really understand the complexity of the infrastructure and the ecosystem.
Okay. On this note, thank you, Mr. Duguin, for joining us today, and thank you everyone in the audience for listening.
Thank you.
And if you can't get enough of room for discussion, well, you are in luck, because on the 24th of April from 1 to 2, we will be welcoming Philip Sands, a barrister and author of books like East-West Street. And he will be talking about the trials and tribulations of international law, the limitations of our international system, and big questions like, do we need a fifth international crime of ecocide?
But for now, thank you once again.
Thank you.
It has been a real pleasure. And please join us in giving a warm round of applause to Stéphan Duguin.